If you have been around the Sonic scene for a while, you've probably seen footage of a game you've never heard before, only to search it up and realize that you can't buy or download it anywhere, with the only proof of its existence being that footage, trailer, screenshot mentioned in a magazine, whatever. Well, that's lost media. Something is lost media when there is proof that a type of media exists, but there is no real way of getting more footage or info about it, because it's not in the possession of anyone willing to document it. And with the Sonic franchise being as huge as it is, of course it doesn't escape that rule and does feature a bunch of lost media that we're gonna take a look at. I asked what your favorite pieces of lost media were on my Twitter and YouTube community, be it games, trailers, prototypes, comics, basically anything Sonic related that could be considered lost media. I expected a few replies, but yeah, let's just say I got a whole lot more contributions than I ever thought I'd get. So I want to thank everyone who left their comment, reply and story about each and every one of these, as I probably couldn't have thought about all of these myself. I'm not gonna cover every single suggestion, just the most interesting ones, which are still a lot. I also want to shout out the Lost Media Wiki, which does feature a bunch of documentation about some of these entries. So thanks everyone who documented those articles. It's about time someone makes a video on this, isn't it? Before we get into the video, I'd like to quickly present to you a project I've helped to create, which is the online store Dopamine. This is a clothing shop created by a friend of mine, featuring designs mostly related to Sonic and Sega in general, as well as a few other ones that might interest you. I also designed some of them, so make sure to check it out if you find it remotely interesting. So, back to the video. When discussing lost media, there are two main statuses to classify it, being recovered and unrecovered. Recovered media is what you would expect, something that was considered lost media at some point that has since been found. With a few interesting examples we're gonna take a look at. Unrecovered media is also pretty self-explanatory, either being partially recovered, unrecovered, lost or with its existence being unconfirmed, which is usually the main focus of the topic. As for recovered media, there are a few examples as I've mentioned. The most known of them is probably Sonic Extreme. Not this Extreme, which is also recovered media to a point, but we'll get to it later. But this Extreme, being a skateboarding game initially pitched for the Xbox, made in 2003 and recovered on the 24th of July 2016 by Andrew Borman. The game was made by Visionscape, being a retooled version of the also unreleased game Bare Knuckle Grind, of which its engine was used for this spin-off completed in less than a week without Sega ever even knowing about it. The co-founder of Visionscape, Mark McDonald, then met with Yuji Naka and showed him the prototype, saying he was very impressed and the project would move forward as a collaboration, though Sega kept their silence and cut communications with them after the Heroes cutscenes were completed. This prototype features Sonic and Shadow, riding skateboards in an area resembling Seaside Hill from the early Heroes trailers, with the only objective being to find keys to unlock a room with a Chaos Emerald, after which the game just boots you into the title screen. It also has a combat mode and a race mode apparently. In 2005, Sega announced Sonic Riders, featuring a lot of the concepts seen in Sonic Extreme, being believed to be the reason of Sega's silence toward Visionscape's concepts, though they couldn't take legal action as the NDA they signed for the Heroes cutscenes gave Sega ownership of anything using their IP, so Sonic Extreme is also legally owned by them. Speaking of Sonic Extreme, this Extreme now. This game needs no introduction, it's the most notorious example of Sonic lost media, even though it's pretty much been recovered at this point. It was set for release in 1996, dying in development around 1997. The development story of this game is pretty crazy and long, so I won't go over the entirety of it, only the most important points. Since Extreme suffered numerous delays and shifting between systems, of course it was stuck in development hell. It initially started as Sonic Mars for the Mega Drive, which can also be considered lost media at this point, and would have been set in the Saturday morning's cartoon universe, being quickly scrapped and shifted to the Sega 32X, then to a short-lived Sega system based on Nvidia technology predating the Saturn, then settling for the latter. One of the 4 million stories planned for this game would have involved Sonic battling Eggman to rescue a guy called Professor Gazebo and protect 6 items known as the Rings of Order, which are said to be the reason of the rings existing. There would also be a wildcat called Tiara that would help Sonic, with confirmed bosses being Fang and Metal Sonic. Initially, the game would have 2 different gameplay styles, one for the main stages and another for the bosses. However, when Sega of Japan came in to check how development was going, they were baffled by the supposed lack of development seen in the main engine, asking the developers to use the boss engine for the entire game, which they allegedly loved. This engine was too similar to Nights into Dreams as one, which made Yuji Naka threaten to quit, causing the change of engine request to be swiftly confiscated. With this back and forth, the game was shelved, as internal politics made things a living nightmare for developers, and one of the spearheads of Sega was nearly driven to the point of only having mere months to live, so they created a port of Sonic 3D Blast instead. A few prototypes for the game have been leaked, which reflect this crazy development, including a very early build where almost nothing works, a build made by third-party studio Point of View, which only worked on a project for a few months at most, but still marked a turning point in the game's already troubled development, causing the appearance of Project Condor, which entirely uses the boss engine, and Sonic PC, which was independently developed by the 2 main developers of Extreme, before they were pulled from the game's development after Point of View's involvement. Yeah, it's pretty confusing. Some project names for the game include Sonic Mars, Sonic 32X, Sonic Saturn, which is unrelated to another Sonic Saturn game we'll take a look at, Sonic Boom, and Sonic Blast. Do you see the trend here? Another piece of recovered media is Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games. It was an iOS game made to promote Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympic Games, but only with Sonic characters and 4 Olympic events to be played. It didn't last for too long on the App Store, being removed within less than a week of release, with the only evidence of this game ever existing for 9 years being footage and screenshots. On the 20th of July 2019, a user called MTB Cooler found an IPA file containing the app for the game, thus being able to be played nowadays. There isn't much to this game really, it resembles a lot a Nintendo DS game honestly, both graphically and stylistically, and appears to be a little fun experience, though nothing much. Lastly, for recovered media that I thought was worth to mention, the SA1 New Year's DLC. This DLC, known as the Kadomatsu DLC, which are the Japanese New Year's decorations, was made exclusive for the Japanese release between the 26th of December 1998 and the 7th of January 1999, dying in obscurity for more than 20 years as it was never made available for the Western release due to different traditions and release dates, as the latter was released in the end of 1999 on receiving the new Millennium Y2K DLC. On the 8th of November 2019, the user Moop the Hedgehog in the DC emulation forums found the DLC in a Japanese 4X VMU that he purchased, referred internally as Sonic ADV_001. The DLC has since been dumped and ported to the SA1 Dreamcast DLC mods, fully translated to English in the PC version, and adds a ton of Kadomatsu decorations all around Station Square, as you would expect, made from bamboo and pine wood, also playing unique songs and messages. Nothing much to it really, but it's pretty amusing. Speaking of SA1 and finally getting into actual and recovered media, for all of you who watched my Sonic Adventure Cut content video, you're probably aware of how much content from trailers, showcases and events is still lost to this day. The most notorious of these is from the called Saturn era. Most of the info we know about this supposed prototype is from what was shown by Takashi Iizuka at the Sonic Adventure Music Experience, where you can see some renders of Sonic and Tails in or around the Angel Island and Mystic Ruins. One of the renders' areas can actually still be seen in the final, namely this spot in the Lost World stage. Interestingly, the Sonic model seen in Tails' mission title cards appears to be the exact same one as the one used for the render where Sonic appears to be in an early Windy Valley Act 2. If you didn't know, Windy Valley at one point was completely different from what is seen in the final, but if you want to know more about it, then make sure to check out my video on Sonic Adventure Cut content. Some concept art from this era includes 2 characters characters meant to appear in the game that never made it into the final, being called Spider-Girl and Fly the Bat. The latter's name probably served as inspiration for the creation of Rouge, while the former Soul is never even seen in any other character, though it can actually be seen in some of Speed Highway's posters. Well, to be honest, they both seem to have merged into what would become Rouge, but I digress. In the auto demo prototype for Sonic Adventure, there are also two unused texture files that date back to November 1997, being the oldest files present in the disc, as well as being believed to have been in that Saturn prototype at some point. Another notorious example of lost media in this game is the build used for the Tokyo International Forum's unveiling of the game. The build used for this appears to be similar at surface level to the auto demo prototype, but otherwise its stages appear to be much earlier iterations. At one point, the early Windy Valley was the sort of holy grail of Sonic Adventure lost media, until it was found in the auto demos files, that is. But the one that's the most mysterious of all now is Twinkle Park. A single shot of Tails standing in an unknown location in this stage can be seen, with almost nothing else being known or shown about it, besides object layout info in the auto demo. Another example of this can be seen in the Knight's Pinball table in Casinopolis, where a magazine shows a screenshot of this area looking like a spiral, obviously much different compared to the final. This event also shows an early version of Open Your Heart, one of several early ones that supposedly exist, that is allegedly sung by Kenichi Tokoi, with the full, not even high quality, but full version probably being lost to time. Speaking of scrapped Saturn games, you might remember from the Sonic Extreme section that I talked about a game called Sonic Saturn we'd get into. Well, here we are. Sonic Saturn was one of the two Sonic games, with the other being Extreme, meant to release for the Sega Saturn. Unlike that game, Saturn's world was meant to be more realistic, though it was never publicly announced and was scrapped pretty early into development. Based on what little concept art we have of it, we can see a background art, a concept art of a wetlands level, and a loading screen also seen in one of the prototypes for Sonic Extreme. Much like other Sonic games at the time, this one was also meant to have 3D special stages. According to Peter Morawiecz, who worked on the game, the idea was that Sonic would run around to position himself behind a ball, go into a stationary spin dash, then you could aim your direction and let go. The camera went overhead to show the resulting action as he smashes into other balls. The goal was to put all those balls away into those portals within 1 minute or some such time limit. He could also push into the balls, but that wasn't very fast and thus wasn't a preferred way to play. In later stages there were little enemies crawling around, making your job more difficult. There were some other arenas in the works, such as Southwestern, Courtyard, etc. After Saturn's cancellation, he attempted to integrate the Sonic Pool special stages into Extreme. However, when this one was cancelled, he attempted to convince the producer of 3D Blast to redesign the special stages to be based on Sonic Pool, though the deadline didn't allow it, thus Sonic Pool was scrapped. We also have the loading/title screen for the special stage, as well as some screenshots of various in-game locations. Another piece of lost media that's pretty interesting to me is the early E3 prototype of Shadow the Hedgehog. For all we know, at the time that I'm recording this, it might not be so lost, as a build labeled as the Shadow the Hedgehog E3 build has been sent to Hidden Palace for dumping and documentation a few months ago, so we'll have to wait for it to see if it is actually lost. Current status is that it still is and might not be in the future, but since that's the case, let's take a look at it. Much like any other Sonic game, Shadow the Hedgehog was present at numerous events to showcase it to fans and press alike, including E3 2005. These early builds went for an even darker and more mature feel compared to the final, where you can not only see soldiers in the game bleeding red blood and actually dying on screen, but there is a cutscene in which you can clearly see a soldier shooting Maria. This shot is actually one of the most notorious pieces of Sonic Lost Media for obvious reasons. Interestingly, a seemingly high-quality screenshot of it was used for a Maria card in Sonic Rivals, meaning that Sega probably still has it out there. It's also believed that there was stronger dialogue in the game, like Sonic using the word piss at some point, which was allegedly changed to tick in the final. The ESRB rating for this game was initially a teen rating for cartoon violence and language, until Sega made some edits to earn it a E10+ rating. There are actually quite a few E3 or event builds that are seemingly lost forever, like Colorsus with a unique rendition of Tropical Resort, Sonic and the Secret Rings' build when it was still called Sonic Wildfire, featuring pretty different assets compared to the final, and an extra animation and voice clip completely absent from the final. Sonic Unleashed's early trailer builds with Windmill Island Savannah Citadel being completely different from the final, with the game looking pretty rough at that point. Sonic Adventure 2's early builds featuring darker lighting and a more mysterious tone, and even a pre-E3 Sonic Heroes build, looking pretty incomplete and empty. Interestingly, in a lot of Heroes pre-release screenshots, the formation displays actually featured an icon alongside the word, with speed being Sonic's shoe and fly being a wing. However, the power icon can never be seen in any screenshot or footage, either being too far away to be rendered, or just off-screen enough for it to be impossible to make out. The most interesting of all of those event builds though has to be the notorious Sonic 06 TGS build. Sonic 06 needs no introduction of course, as it's considered one of, if not the worst Sonic game of all time, as well as one of the worst games of all time in general. Though a year earlier at the Tokyo Game Show in 2005, a tech demo of the game with huge changes from the final was shown to the press. The trailer itself shows Sonic looking closer to its SA1 design, taking place in an area in or around Kingdom Valley, of which a high-quality version has also since been lost. After the trailer was played, a real-time tech demo was presented by Yuji Naka and controlled by the game's director Shun Nakamura. The demo takes place in a small area of Kingdom Valley and was mostly used to show the game's technical achievements, such as its use of the Havok physics engine and the day-night cycle that was eventually scrapped from the final game. There are multiple differences when compared to the final, as I've mentioned, including a different model and different animations, which look like updated versions of SA1s, as well as Sonic being pretty slow and the camera being really close to him, making him look very big. In general, it looks very different and early, mostly focusing on graphics and physics than anything else. This demo has never been officially released or leaked online, but an attempt to recreate it has been developed by Chaos X, the developer of PO6, called Project TGS, doing a pretty good job of recreating it from the few and low quality footage we have of it. Early 06 in general is pretty interesting, as it shows the troubled development of the game, as well as a lot of changes in concept and art direction, such as the early design for Soliana Castletown being quite different, especially because it's less grey, features a clearer and bluer sky and the buildings are more colorful, resembling Spagonia quite a bit actually. Besides being known for being, well, quite bad, Sonic 06 is also known for introducing Silver. And how many of you know that there was a supposed scrapped Silver game? Yeah, a game called Sonic the Hedgehog Awakening was found in the game's listing of Pete Capella's website, the voice actor of Silver in 06. His website features all the games he worked on, where Awakening is located between 06 and Rivals, meaning the game was in development sometime between 2006 and 2009 and cancelled at an unknown date. There are no known screenshots, videos, prototypes or even concept art of this game, though it being listed on Pete Capella's website suggests it went far enough into development to begin work on voice acting, being later cancelled during the recording period. Though there is no actual confirmation, this has led people to speculate that the game was indeed centered around Silver, as no voice actor is credited besides him, being believed that it would tie in with Sonic 06's story. All Pete Capella apparently knows about it is that it was going to be released between 2006 and 2009, so it could be a codename for Unleashed, Black Knight or even Colors DS probably, but it doesn't make much sense as all the other games have their final names in the list. Speaking of DS, do you know about Sonic DS? You probably do, as it's one of the most popular unreleased Sonic games out there. It was a playable tech demo shown at E3 2004, where the main objective was to quickly move the stylus to the left and the right of the touchscreen, making Sonic run faster depending on the speed of the stylus, while touching the top of the screen would make Sonic jump over obstacles. It is unknown if it was a mere tech demo or if Sega actually intended to develop an entire game based on the concept, as nothing came of it, though the game is graphically pretty impressive for the DS, but it probably never came to fruition as it would have become pretty boring after a while. The secret ring scrapped scene at the end of the level appears to actually be inspired from the scene present in this game, which is pretty neat. On the topic of unreleased portable games, did you know that Sonic Riders was meant to release on the GBA? Alongside the released versions of the original game, an additional port of it was also in development, being ultimately cancelled. It was being developed by Backbone Entertainment, the ones who later made Sonic Rivals, under a pretty tight schedule in order for it to release at the same time as all the other versions. Due to the limitations of the GBA, emulating the fast-paced and intense 3D experience of the original game was quite literally impossible, with the port seemingly going for a sprite-based racer similar to Outrun, but it would be this 2D art style that would dictate its demise, as Sega of Japan insisted that some 3D elements would need to be added, which made completing the game on time an impossible task. There is no footage or screenshots of this version, but a few assets have been released from animators who were working on it, such as the title screen, where the game would be called Sonic Extreme, which is a very popular title among unreleased games it seems, and the flag animation. Another unreleased portable game is Sonic Generations for the PSP. As we all know, Sonic Generations did get a portable port for the 3DS, but it was also meant to release on the PSP weirdly. Not much is known about this build other than some leaked assets by a preservation group called Obscure Gamers, who got their hands on a mysterious UMD containing a build of the game when it was still under the working title Sonic Anniversary. They leaked a title screen, a few pretty and interesting assets, a very bare-bones debug menu, and level textures believed to belong to Mushroom Hill. This dates all the way back to November 2009, which is really early into the game's development. The demo shown at E3 2011 was apparently made for the PSP as well, under the name Sonic Boom, not to be confused with Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, which also features a very interesting lost build known as Sonic Synergy. It was one of the original builds and the original title for Sonic Boom, having very different ideas from what the entire Boom spin-off series turned out to be like. Around 2007, Sega was looking for Western located development teams to revitalize their properties, such as Sonic and Golden Axe. This Golden Axe game was pretty bad, so Sega scrapped that idea entirely, until Sonic Colors was received to critical acclaim, that is. The project was revived and Big Red Button, which was composed of ex-Naughty Dog developers, was called upon to produce this new game. During the early stages of development, very drastic redesigns for the characters were proposed, of which Sonic Team disapproved and told them to stick closer to the source material. The original storyline was pretty strong and featured the ancients, ancestors of Sonic and his friends, who sealed the evil Lyric away, which would be a null, having a pretty serious tone overall. The game was originally developed for the PS4 and Xbox One, and maybe even PC, but was eventually shifted to the Wii U following Sega's agreement with Nintendo to release a certain number of games on their consoles. The game was originally developed separately from the TV series, until Sega decided to begin a mass media production of the Boom series, with the game being absorbed into it. Lyric was changed to a snake and elements from the TV series were added. Due to the critical acclaim of Colors, the tone of the whole franchise steered towards comedy, which prompted Sega to order the original storyline to be scrapped. In addition, huge time constraints were put onto Big Red Button, which resulted in one of the worst Sonic games ever released, as well as one of the worst games of all time period. A 502-page long document, being basically a style guide for all the development phases of the game, both Sonic Synergy, Project Apollo being one of the earliest codenames, and Sonic Boom still exists online, showing a lot of the scrapped and cut content from the final. reveal, such as the original title screen mockup, as well as some development and beta footage, all taken from pretty early in development, which is really interesting. These early design concepts remind me a lot of the beta Kronos Island for Sonic Frontiers. If you're not familiar with this case, 3 islands out of the 5 in the game were meant to be one gigantic landmass, reducing the number of islands to 3. Seeing as the last 2 islands in the final are Rhea and Uranus, the 2 islands that would merge into Kronos, you'd probably go through Kronos, Aris, Chaos, and then return to Kronos for the finale of the game. Evidence of this can be seen as late as the announcement trailer from December 2021, where it showcases areas of the final game's Rhea and Uranus as being part of the Kronos Island reveal, suggesting this was a fairly late change. They were apparently separated because playtesters thought the island was too big and boring. Uranus itself is completely separate from Kronos and Rhea in the final, but the latter two still use the same model but are inaccessible to each other. Some leaked beta footage we got of the game shows this early Kronos, as well as having a lot more vegetation, effects and details being put onto the game, probably scaled back because of the Switch version, thus making this beta build unrecovered to this day. Speaking of early, Sonic 1, being the first Sonic game of all time, was released very early into Sonic's life cycle, and as with basically every single Sonic game, it features a pretty mysterious build which has been unrecovered and shows a bunch of scrapped stuff for the game. Sonic 1 was first shown at the Tokyo Toy Show in June 1990, also being the first time the game was playable for the public. In an interview with Yuji Naka, it was revealed that they put together a small playable tech demo featuring Sonic in an early Green Hill Zone. Even though development on the game had basically just begun, it was more technically advanced than the final game is, possessing 7 layers of parallax scrolling with multiple assets moving independently from Sonic scrolling through the stage. One of the most noticeable differences between this version and the final are the strange blue structures in the background, being unknown if they represent rock formations or buildings. It also only featured the mountain range in the background, being modified in the final to look further away. There is also a cut enemy, a peculiar welcome sign, and Sonic running in midair, suggesting his jumping animation didn't feature the jump ball. Also, according to Yuji Naka, this demo was meant to be included in Sonic Mega Collection, but was never included due to Sega apparently losing it as well, making it highly unlikely that the build will ever be found. Classic Sonic games have a bunch of scrapped levels weirdly, especially Sonic 2, being the biggest offender. Some of them have actual assets made for them, meaning they made it further than conceptualization, while others only have concept art, with some of the latter being used for later games, such as Ocean Wind Zone for Emerald Coast and Tropical Sun Zone for Angel Island. A wood zone called Secret Jungle only had concept art made for it, until like 2 months ago, where we got access to a full animated mock-up of the zone, with Sonic still using its Sonic 1 sprite. Well, it also has a small layout in a prototype, but that's about it really. A notorious scrapped stage is Sand Shower, being a western themed desert and one of the earliest levels worked on. It has no concept art, but a mock-up for it was made for multiple magazines at the time. A few assets for this stage have actually been found at the very end of a floppy disk, owned by a former Sega Technical Institute member called Tom Payne, being unreferenced by the file system. Its palette data has been overwritten by art files of other early enemies. The Sonic's palette is used instead, though a reconstruction of the palette has been made from what early mockups of the stage exist. Another pretty famous cut stage is Rock World, being a simple palette swap of Sand Shower, and replaces the cacti with Christmas trees and gives it a winter theme, also being present in magazines. Hidden Palace is probably the most known piece of cut content in the entirety of the franchise, being one of the first stages developed for Sonic 2 alongside Emerald Hill, Hilltop and Chemical Plant. The plan for the level would be that Sonic would learn how to become supersonic here after collecting the 7 Chaos Emeralds, or a hidden zone within Mystic Cave as can be seen in Sonic 2's mobile ports. The removal of Hidden Palace was a last-minute decision, as music, a title card and a level select icon were created and can be found within the finals data, also being fully playable in some of Sonic 2's prototypes. Lastly, for Sonic 2, Genocide City. Planned as part of the game's finale, it was a mechanical themed stage that has this weird fucking name because the developers wanted it to sound dangerous, being later changed to Cyber City because the name was... well, maybe too dangerous. The stage appears to be a predecessor of Metropolis. Another pretty famous cut classic Sonic level is R2 from Sonic CD. R2 or Round 2 is an unfinished level from Sonic CD and was meant to take place between Palm Tree Panic, which is Round 1, and Collision Chaos, which is Round 3, being cut quite early into development but with leftovers of it still being present in the final, with Naoto Oshima claiming the level was at one point called Dubious Depths, with Masato Nishimura confirming it, revealing that it was also called Ridicule Route at some point. A developer's diary video was released by Sega of Europe in 2011 to promote a re-release of the game, where in the video a sketch of what appears to be rainbow-colored waterfalls appears, being confirmed by Christian Whitehead to belong to R2. There are multiple explanations for its removal. Either the design wasn't compatible with Sonic Speed, its music data didn't fit into the CD-ROM, or it didn't meet quality standards. The biggest clue that something is missing in the game is from the game's ending sequence, which shows animated sections of the game in level order. After Palm Tree Panic, Sonic is seen in what looks like an overgrown, ruined area with blue and grey metallic structures and pillars, with nothing resembling this sequence being seen in the final game. Builds of Sonic 1 and 2 for the Sega CD were also shown at one point, by the way, but they never ended up being released. Speaking of never-released classic Sonic games, Sonic 16 is a cancelled Sonic game based on the Saturday morning TV series. It featured pretty different graphics, art and gameplay style from what was usually seen at the time, being more similar to the original Prince of Persia than actual Sonic games. Sonic would have new abilities here, such as being able to climb ledges, and new attacks, such as a ring attack, buzzsaw and spike blast. Sally Acorn would make an appearance as well. There isn't much to it really. All we have of it is just terrible quality footage of a very short tech demo. There is also a lost original storyline for the Archie comics, which has a pretty complex backstory, so I'll be pretty brief about it. Basically, Ken Penders was the guy who wrote and drew the Archie comics and made its backstory and character roster too complex, eventually being dropped in favor of Ian Flynn after some disagreements with executives. Penders wanted to obtain his old contracts from Archie, and due to his inability of doing so, he copyrighted the characters he created and Archie sued him, so both went to court. Ian Flynn and the rest of the people who worked at the comic assumed that Penders had no leg to stand on and just kept using the characters. However, at some point it became evident that he might have that leg, so the comic eventually underwent a major reboot. I'm not gonna lie, I don't really care about the comics, so I have no idea what this original storyline even means. But apparently at the time of the lawsuit, it was going through an arc where Sonic and his friends were on a quest to rescue Sally from Eggman, who was using her in Mecha Sally. Issue 243 kicked off the storyline Endangered Species, where Sonic stopped in an Echidna colony, aided by Knuckles as they sought to protect the last of the Echidnas from Eggman's soldiers, as well as an angry Tasmanian devil, whose species was apparently eradicated by the Echidnas. The next issue saw that Tasmanian devil sent every Echidna into a warp ring to another dimension, while Sonic dealt with a modified Metal Knuckles. Apparently, the story was never meant to be this way and was actually supposed to have a happy ending. All the issues have rewritten dialogue removing any mentions to Penders' characters, such as the Echidna colony, Knuckles' ancestors, and other characters originally present in the cover art, which would be dropped entirely. The last thing I wanted to talk about has to do with the Sonic OVA. You probably know where I'm going with this, which is the fact that its full soundtrack has been unrecovered to this day. Well, until 2020, the soundtrack in its entirety was completely lost, with only fan recreations existing, until the user Mefiresu uploaded what seemed to be the entire soundtrack for the movie. Well, it turns out that besides not being the entire soundtrack, as some songs appear to be missing, the songs that are present sound like early versions of the final ones used for the movie, as well as some being unknown either due to being unused or unrelated to the OVA. This soundtrack was provided by someone who actually had a demo recording in a single MP3 file containing all the released songs, but not being in the best quality possible, as it has occasional sound artifacts, probably due to being earlier than the final. If this much progress has been made, then maybe we'll really get the entire soundtrack in the future. Also, apparently the OVA's Cantonese dub is partially lost, with only the second half being found, while the Arabic and Korean dubs are fully lost. Take it as a big allegedly, as I have no way of confirming this. Well, I lied when I said that was the last thing, because there are two other things I want to mention which I couldn't insert in a clever way in the video, being Sonic Cafe and the Sonic Forces VR demo. Sonic Cafe was a mobile service provided by Sega between 2001 and 2007. The service was only available in Japan, though some games made its way into the West via the Sega mobile service. The interesting part about the Cafe service is that a lot of the games featured have been completely lost to time, with only footage or screenshots being available. Others have been partially found, mostly due to ports or downgraded versions being available to play via other services, and the remaining few have been found and dumped online, but they are not very interesting really. The Sonic Forces VR demo has to do with a leftover title screen in its files where it can be read Sonic 2017 VR demo version, second ROM confidential. There is literally nothing else we know about this, besides a level called W3V01, which is thought to have been to test the VR camera, since it's an unused fully automated stage, much like the main game, and is also the only stage that uses the V prefix, but that's about all that's known or can be speculated about it. A series as popular as Sonic of course has a bunch more lost media which we probably don't even have any memory or footage of, but this video is probably already more than 30 minutes long, and I think I've covered a lot of interesting stuff with as much detail and depth as I could for a video like this, so I hope you enjoyed it. I would seriously like to read what your favorite pieces of lost media are, or some other stuff that you thought I should have covered that I didn't, or other topic you want me to cover. I have a Patreon where you can support me for quite cheap and get a few perks and whatnot, such as early access to videos, as well as to help me keep going. To do this, you can also subscribe if you enjoy my content, as it does really help me out a ton, as my videos take a long time to come out, so consider turning on notifications as well. I also have a Twitter if you want to follow me there, and check out my community tab once in a while, as I post quite frequently there. And that's about it really. I'll hopefully see you soon.